So it's just
Yeah.
really cool to see like how, and I say it all the time that it's empowering. It's, you know, it's so great to be able to trust your body and have confidence in it, but it's really cool to like have clients tell you that and you're like, the work we're doing makes a huge difference.
So with your clients, you kind of mentioned that you help them through their first competitions and sort of getting into the sport and how to
Mhm.
progress from there. What kind of principles do you apply when they start off and then progress through?
So whenever I start working with people, I always have like a kind of an assessment intro session, just so like because there's a lot that I can see just out of a squat or a lunge. Like I can see like, oh, you don't press your big toes down. Let's put some weight in your toes, right? So if there are those outliers like that, then I can, kind of take from my experience and do like more specific tests and be like, oh, like I can see like you have like a really limited internal rotation on your right hip compared to your left hip. And of course, it depends on you will typically see girls undereat more than anything else just because of society and like what we've been told from a young age. So I have found that if we can get you to a place where you're eating enough and feeling yourself well and therefore promoting enough recovery, a lot of those performance deficits that we might feel or experience throughout the menstrual cycle, and again, this is very like individual, anecdotal, this is not very general at all, those tend to start to feel a little better and less of like a and more of like
Mhm.
a so that's more steadied out. Again, it's eliminating variables and just, treating your body like a like how you should, like just making sure you're getting enough fuel.
Hello and welcome back. Today we have Laura Sue. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So if you just give us a little breakdown on who you are, what you do, and how you got to the place that you're at.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So my name is Laura Sue. I am a Seattle native. I live in Seattle, Washington. My journey in this industry started, let's see. Well, let's see. So in high school, I really enjoyed. I was an equestrian. I horseback rode, and I taught kids how to ride horses. And I really enjoyed the teaching, coaching aspect. But obviously, when it came to go to college and figure out what I wanted to study, I wasn't super sure. I wanted to stay in state, so I went to Seattle Pacific University and got my degree in exercise science there. The interest in exercise science kind of came from just liking to like working out in high school. Enjoyed moving my body and was super fascinated always by like science and biology and that kind of stuff. So kind of just fell into that, and then while I was at SPU, joined the rowing team, and that's kind of where I found my passion per se for strength and conditioning and athletics and stuff like that. So while I was at SPU, I started interning at Maximum Sports Conditioning, and that's kind of where I started off my career as a strength and conditioning coach. And then as I, continued to work, I started my own business, coaching clients online, coaching clients one-on-one in person. That business kind of blew up and grew and became what it is today, where I'm full-time, self-employed, working with clients 6 days a week, 8 to 12 clients a day. And I have on top of that, I have also dove into the sport of powerlifting. I am a nationally ranked 56 kilo powerlifter in the USAPL. And I also coach clients through their first powerlifting meets and get them into the sport as well. So that's just a little intro to me.
Nice. So what kind of like what's your history through sport and how well have you done in them?
Yeah, so I was a horse child, a horse girl growing up. So that was like my first quote unquote sport. I tried like gymnastics and ballet and stuff, but I would never really, I was pretty introverted as a kid, so I never really enjoyed like being in that big group environment. So I started horseback riding when I was around, well, first time I sat on a horse was like 2. Started actually taking horseback riding lessons around 10 years old. Horseback riding is really expensive. Surprise, surprise. My parents couldn't afford it. So I started working for my trainer and working for lessons like that. So I, started out working there like once a week, twice a week for a couple hours, and then eventually just loved it so much. I was there for 5 days a week, like 12 hours a day, through high school. And then eventually, started working their summer day camp programs for a couple of years before I went to college. So that was kind of, it was like, I loved horses, wanted to learn how to ride. As far as like the competitive aspect of it, never got an opportunity to do that because of the price and just how expensive it was. But like learned how to ride, learned how to train horses, learned how to teach other people how to ride horses and stuff like that. So that was like up until college, and I still do ride now, but obviously not like as much or competitively, just for fun, just to enjoy being with the animals and taking care of them more than anything else. And then when I got to college, walked onto the rowing team. SBU is a Division II school. So I tried out, walked on. I'm 5'2". I am not tall enough to be a rower at all. My technique really saved me. I ended up in the varsity 4 my senior year, so I did okay for being 5'2" and with girls who are all 5'10" plus. So I did all right. So did that, and then once I got out of college, I graduated, was done with rowing. I kind of thought about continuing some endurance sports because at that point I was also running. Like probably like 30-ish miles a week. So, a decent amount of running too. Um, but I always loved the weight room, loved lifting weights, got into lifting a bit more. And then less than a year after I graduated from college, so in 2019, I did a rookie competition for powerlifting.
Mm.
Um, our state director, Dana Snow, she's super awesome and provides all these big, great opportunities for people who have no experience in the sport, have no coach, to come in and get help and feel welcome to the community and try it out for the first time. So that's what I did. Um, I did the rookie meet and then was hooked, and then did one more meet, and then COVID happened. So lots of training. And then my second meet out of COVID, I think was my first nationals that I got to do in Vegas in 2021. So that was really awesome. And then kind of haven't looked back since. So yeah.
Nice. What kind of records are you or numbers are you pushing and pulling?
Um, my last meet in August, I finally squatted I squat 297, but I call it 300 because basically 300. It's all in kilos, so that's why the pounds are weird. Benched 171 and then deadlifted 385. Um, yeah, so those are my best numbers in a meet. Squat and deadlift were lifetime best too, which is really cool. Yeah.
So what is that for us Brits?
So 135 kilos squat, 77.5 kilo bench, and a 175 kilo deadlift.
And you said you're 53 kilos?
56 kilo,
56?
56 kilos.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
some good numbers.
I'm trying to catch up with those, top national girls. So
Nice. And we've previously spoke and you were going to do a national competition as well in
yeah, in September. So
September.
I have a meet in Hawaii in February, and then in September is USAPL Raw Nationals, which I will be planning on doing, and that will be in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Nice. So how do you manage the business side and the S&C coach and then you as an athlete?
It definitely has helped since I have gone completely full time on my own now. I used to work part time still at Maximum Sports Conditioning, which was great. I loved it. I love working with the athletes, and that was 5 years there, working as a coach there. But just when you work 20 hours in one place and then 40, 50 hours another, plus trying to be a competitive athlete, plus trying to run a business, it was just getting to be too much. So I just decided, like, I'm just going to go completely full time my own. I'm making more than enough money than I need to, live there. So I'm totally fine being completely self employed. So still working, like 10 to 12-hour days most days of the week. But stepping down from strength and conditioning at Maximum Sports Conditioning definitely helped. So it's nice because I can run like structure my own day, structure my own hours. So I always make sure I have a 2 to 3 hour gap to work out, like take my time lifting and stuff like that. I always have it kind of at my ideal time of day,
Mm.
so kind of midday, which is nice because I don't have to go like after I've trained 10 clients, and I don't have to work out like at 4 or 3 in the morning. So that's also nice. I can kind of carve out time in my day, like where I want for workouts. And it's also nice because I don't have to ask anyone if I can take time off to
Mm,
go do powerlifting meets or go referee at powerlifting meets or go coach at powerlifting meets and promote my brand and further my career in that way. So it's definitely has its pros and cons, running your own business. But and in terms of like what I want to do, where I'm at my career, it's not too difficult just because, I'm my own boss, so I can kind of just do whatever I want, which is
yeah.
really nice.
So how was that jump between S&C coach to then making that decision of, yeah, I'm just going to pursue my own thing?
Yeah, so I mean, trying to think of like kind of where it started to blow up. I mean, so I started my own business in like spring of 2019, and when you start from scratch, it's a very slow build. I had been at LA Fitness, which is like a commercial chain gym here in the USA, and I was a one-on-one trainer there. Hated it. LA Fitness is not my jam, so I decided to start my own business. I was lucky enough to have several, like a handful of clients follow me because I moved to a gym in Seattle, Aspire Athletics, which is like a small private gym. So, it's just paying a fee as an independent contractor. And then I was lucky enough to have them follow me. But then, 2020 comes, COVID happens, gyms get shut down. So that was, not that great because we couldn't make any money really. But I really seized the opportunity to really work on the online side of my business. Get better at social media, promote myself more on Google, learn what SEO was, learn how to build a website, and really just tried to like evolve it from there. So once we were able to open back up, post COVID, I honestly feel like all that work really paid off because my schedule just
Mm,
blew up. I went from having, like that handful of clients to 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 clients a day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. So it just kind of blew up from there. And I'm in a really good spot right now where I've done enough work on the back end to where, people can just
mm,
kind of come to me. It's not too hard for me to generate new clientele. I just do a really good job with the clients I have. You get referrals, you have your website on listed on Google. So, it's that's kind of how it COVID was kind of a blessing just for me with my business and just giving me the opportunity, the downtime to really capitalize on it and work on all that stuff, which I think has led into, kind of my business being a
mm.
sustainable entity as it is today.
How would you sort of advise people to sort of reach out to these clients and work on that side as well?
Yeah, so I had two mentees kind of for like business/fitness this summer. So I'll just kind of tell you what I told both of them. You need to build a following. Everyone's just like, "Oh, but I hate social media. I'm not good at social media." I'm like, "I don't care. Get good at it. Like just practice it." It's just like, if you have no followers, what's the harm in just starting to post and practice, post crappy stuff, have stuff that fails. It's just like working out, right? You're not going to be good at it right off the bat. You're not going to know what you're doing right off the bat, but you have to just start doing something, right? And then as you get more experience, as you get more reps in, you're going to get better at it. As you expose yourself more to it, you're going to figure out who are the leaders in knowledge in that space, and you're going to learn from them. And then you're going to see what works for you and what you like and what you don't like. So you got to build a following somehow, whether that's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, whatever it is. It's just going to be really, really helpful to have that following. A lot of trainers really like to use Instagram, and I personally have found it to be very useful. I've gotten a lot of clients like DMing me off Instagram. That's how I met a lot of people that I train still today. And then, once you have the revenue and the capital to do it, really invest in your website, invest in someone to build out your website professionally so it looks good, invest in a copywriter, invest in photographers. Of course, this is after, you have the means to do it. But, social media, again, going back to having a following, that's free to build up, right? You don't have to pay. It's just time. But, if you don't have clients, you got time, right? Because
Mm,
you're not busy working with people that you got time to do that. So there's no excuse really for not doing it when you're not busy and you're trying to build at first, especially if you know that that's what you want to do. So that's my biggest piece of advice, to just, find out what you're good at, talk, try to become a leader in
mm.
knowledge in that topic, and, just demonstrate what you know, and then the clients will come to you and show your personality online. Um, and all, all that kind of stuff. It's all stuff that people will hear if they go take, business courses and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
that's like my big piece of advice.
nice. See, I feel like I'm okay with the social media side on my podcast page because it's just this. I'm just speaking to you, and I'm not thinking about, oh no, there's a camera on me. Like
Yeah.
on my other page, I'm just like, oh, record.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's so nerve-wracking, and I like really hate it recording myself at first, but again, it's just like everything else. Just practice, keep doing it. You'll get used to it. It'll become no big deal at some point. So.
Yeah. So with your clients, you kind of mentioned that you help them through their first competitions and sort of getting into the sport and how to
Mhm.
progress from there. What kind of principles do you apply when they start off and then progress through?
Yeah, so it really just depends on like what level they are coming in, what their goals are coming in, and honestly, like their personality type has a big key factor in it too. So whenever I start working with people, I always have like a kind of an assessment intro session, and I take people through the basic movement patterns like squats, bench press, RDL, so a hip hinge, some sort of single leg movement, and then overhead presses, just very basic stuff, just so like because there's a lot that I can see just out of a squat or a lunge. Like I can see like, oh, you don't press your big toes down, so we have a lot of foot instability, which is leading to your knees falling in, which is leading to you losing your balance in squats. Or I can see, oh, they don't have any control over their core, or they do have really good control of their core. So when they squat, they have a nice neutral back. When they come down, they have good hip mobility, they have good ankle mobility. So just those basic movement patterns tell me a lot. And if I do see something funky and kind of like, oh, I don't typically see that, because when you work with people for long enough, you'll kind of know when there are outliers and when, oh, this is very normal. Like you have been taught your whole life to only squat in your heels. That's why you're falling backwards. Let's put some weight in your toes, right? So if there are those outliers like that, then I can, kind of take from my experience and do like more specific tests and be like, oh, like I can see like you have like a really limited internal rotation on your right hip compared to your left hip. Maybe that's something we need to tackle a little bit before we start loading you up a little bit more, or at least be working on it, at first. So it's going to be very individualized depending on the person. But again, like most people come in at this certain level, and I
Mm,
can typically like take them through kind of a template from there. And of course, it depends on their goals. So not everyone who works with me wants to be a powerlifter. A lot of people who work with me are I always tell everyone like my ideal client is a millennial woman who have fur children, and it's a dual income household. Like my ideal clientele is right there. They're fun to work with, and a lot of them, are at that age where predominantly when we were younger, we were all told eat less, get skinny, muscles ugly, do cardio only. And they've all kind of are young enough though to have wanted to move away from that narrative. And I want muscle, I want to be strong, I want to be able to stand up when I'm older, I don't want to break my bones tripping and falling when I am postmenopause, whatever that word is. But I don't know how, because no one's ever told me how. So that's kind of the majority of my clientele. And then, some of them do eventually want to be like, oh, powerlifting, that's really cool. You get to like be in a really supportive environment, be competitive, and lift heavy, squat, bench, and deadlift heavy. So a lot of times, like what I do is I don't shy away from big barbell movements with these ladies. I
mm,
load them up. A lot of these people just don't understand like how to strength train, or like what they should be feeling, or like how heavy they should be going. So a lot of it is just, showing them like, hey, you can deadlift 150 pounds, even though you haven't done it before. Hey, you're perfectly capable of squatting more than your body weight. And then it's just really awesome to see people, they have a great program that's individualized to them and whatever their specific goals are, but then like realizing like how cool it is to be stronger, and how much more capable they are. I just recently had a client, she trains with me, she's been training with me for almost a year now. um, Never ever ever has really set foot in a gym before she started working with me. Super beginner. Like if another trainer were to look at her, they might not even put her on under a barbell or anything like that, because she's just not strong.
mm.
No muscle coming in, just like never had experience like that, has always been naturally skinny, never felt the inclination to need to go to the gym. And we've been working out and consistently once a week, She's been getting stronger. She went from squatting 10-pound dumbbell and now she's squatting 120 pounds for reps, which is, huge progress, especially when you're only lifting once a week.
Yeah.
Um, and then she told me that her yard tent got blown over the fence and onto some electric wires. So she told me she all by herself got a ladder, a big heavy ladder, climbed up to her roof, unhooked the electric wire, threw the tent off, and then hooked it back on, and then put the ladder away. And she was like, I would not have been able to do that at all if I hadn't been doing this strength training. So it's just
Yeah.
really cool to see like how, and I say it all the time that it's empowering. It's, you know, it's so great to be able to trust your body and have confidence in it, but it's really cool to like have clients tell you that and you're like, the work we're doing makes a huge difference. So,
Yeah. And I think
there
it's
is,
those little stories that sort of make your experience as a coach as well.
yeah,
Like I've got
definitely.
I've got some clients that are just like, I want to pick up my granddaughter or
Hmm.
my niece and just be
Hmm.
fine with that load, and I'm like, that's it's pretty achievable. Like when we
Yeah.
actually get going. Um,
Hmm.
Something that you mentioned before, you mentioned personalities and that how that also plays a big part. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess what I mostly mean in terms of personality, I typically see like two types of people, and I'm sure you've seen this too, the people who want to like go super heavy all the time and don't want to like go less than last week, and the people who are really scared and need like the extra encouragement. So depending on that, the program, like I guess more of the rate of progression and the
Mm,
exercise I use are going to look a little bit different. They're all at the basis the same. We're all going to be doing compound movements. Um, depending how many times a week you come in, it might be both upper and lower. It could be upper only or lower only, depending on how many times a week you train with me. We're going to be doing accessory movements and isolation movements, right? It's going to be basic strength workout, right? And then some conditioning too, if we need it or if we have time. But that rate of progression might be a little bit different. The way that I talk to these people might be a little bit different. So if I have someone um, who is, let's just say I'll build a client, for example, just a pretend client, super motivated, wants to go heavy each week, and also just like is very like science brained, right?
mm,
This person is going to love to hear, like, going to be genuinely curious to be like, wait, why aren't you putting more weight on the bar for me? I could obviously do more. And then I can go ahead and be able to explain the concepts of periodization and progression. And they're going to enjoy that and get something from it, right? And they're going to find that valuable versus someone who is, let's take the opposite of this, a little bit more timid with the weights, less experience, motivated, but not quite as in a rush
mm.
necessarily. And then also maybe not super science brained. They might not want to hear like why they need to be going up in weight each week and progressive overload and et cetera, et cetera. But I could be using different verbiage and different words to be able to help encourage them, like, like, hey, your body's going to get used to this. If we do this weight for X amount of weeks, so let's just add just like 2 pounds today and just like see how it feels. And then, the more exposure that they have to that you start to see them be a little less timid and shut down when you put more weight on the bar and become more excited and like excited to see what their body's capable of.
Have you found a correlation between those two personality types and male and female?
Um, no, honestly, I find it more based off of like, I want to say occupation. And
Mm,
occupation, I guess, kind of leads into like what their interests are and like what side of the brain they're more dominant in and like stuff like that. So obviously like if you're more math and science you might be in tech, and if you're not so much you might be like in, I'm not I don't know how to generalize the other side of it,
yeah,
but so like um
like a health profession.
yeah, 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 and that also plays into like how, and then whatever they do might play into how much like risk they're willing to take.
Mm,
So it's, I would say, for maybe kids, it would be a little bit more male and female, but like with adults who I primarily work with, it definitely feels more like just like what life experience they've
Mm.
had and what could cause them to be more timid, versus a little bit more gung ho about adding more weight to the bar.
Yeah. So with your clients, what kind of sort of philosophies do you or periodization plans do you make for them?
So it really depends. A lot of it depends, you know. If I have a client who's only seeing me once a week, and I do provide programming for outside of sessions with me, but not everyone does it. So if they only see me once a week and I know that's the only strength workout they get, I'll take a very linear approach because that's
Mm.
kind of the only one that makes sense. So, you know, we're going to try to add weight to the bar, or we're going to try to add volume to your sets at the same weight from last week. Um, I do for most clients, I do take a 4 week cycle where I will progress them through the 4 weeks. And then I, most of the time, will be just changing accessories. And that's more so just for like client enjoyment and not having things be
Mm.
bland, you know, because we could be doing the same accessories realistically for 12, 16 weeks.
Movements,
You know,
movement.
it's fun to mix things up. We're still working those muscle groups. If I have someone who's super new and they really need to stay on it, like if I'm like they really just need to get their hamstrings stronger, I might have them stay on RDLs for
Mm.
10 weeks, right? But it's just really depend on the person. Or if I'm like, no, they're good, like they've progressed, we can change the exercise now. But you'll find that the changes I make are very subtle. So like they'll go from a reverse lunge one block to a goblet split squat on next block. So they're still getting the unilateral work, but we're just changing
Mhm.
it up just to, you know, again, just for like client enjoyment. Um, if I have someone who is working with me a little more frequently or does the programming themselves, I like kind of a daily undulating,
Mm.
kind of like a periodization. Again, it depends on the person's experience level. A newbie, I would probably have more on linear because I don't really want them touching weights that are too challenging by themselves because they, for one, are not super confident in their form yet. So if they feel like, ooh, this is heavy, they might, you know, get nervous and not want to do that workout. And my biggest priority is like get you consistent, get you moving.
Mm.
Like that's going to be the biggest key to success. And once we can get you confident and consistent, that's when I can kind of start throwing more challenges at you on your own because I know you're now more confident in your abilities and your strength in the gym. So unless they're like super beginners still, I like a daily undulating periodization or just undulating. Um, just because, especially for powerlifters specifically, I just find it a little bit easier to keep the exercise variations a little bit more consistent versus like a true conjugate
Mm.
approach. Because, you know, if I'm always changing the variations of those main lifts, it's kind of hard to track, unless you do it in like a very systematic, maybe it's like, you know, a 2 week cycle where you change off you do like, let's say bandit squat week one, and then you do comp squat week two, and you cycle between those. That might be a little easier. But again, it just depends how you structure it. So I prefer the daily undulating because these get more exposures to the same variation, but you can mitigate fatigue and overtraining and accommodation by having those like high, medium, low days, and then, you know, changing the focus of the day depending on what the athlete needs. So for example, like if I have a newer powerlifter, their heavy day could be like, you know, a classic, you know, kind of heavier day, like rep ranges of like 3 to 5, 80 to 90%, somewhere there 80, 85%. And then maybe their light day will be a very, very technique focused day where I take the percentage way down, but it's like long pause squats or double pause squats
Mm.
or 1.5 squats or wide stance box squat, depending on what I think they need and they're lacking. And again, like I'll run that for anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the person and how I see the rate of progression.
Nice. What kind of help do you then do with moving on from that? So when they've got a competition and it's planned that they're competing on that day, how do you then program for that?
Yeah, so we work backwards. So if I know someone has a meet on like January 1st, I'm going to work backwards from January 1st. And I like to run meet preps. Depending on the athlete experience, like if it's your first meet, I'll run a 12-week meet prep cycle.
Mm.
If you're more experienced, you could probably do like a 8 to 10 week cycle. But essentially, what you're doing is first. So the thing about powerlifting, people think it's like just maxing out. a little bit more than that. You have to be able to display the most amount of weight on squat, bench, deadlift all in the same day in a short period of time. Well, it could be short, it could be also very long. But there is an element of like stamina and endurance that comes
Mm-hmm.
to that, which a lot of people don't realize. So having SBD days or squat, bench, deadlift days is paramount because you need to get your body used to that. And also having some sort of work capacity. Like people like, oh, powerlifters are just like fat and do only one rep and they don't have to do any cardio. I'm like, no, you gotta have some sort of work capacity. So I don't really enjoy doing comp lifts, like squat, bench, deadlifts, competition specific technique lifts in higher rep ranges, just because I feel like the breakdown and form you get is not
Mm,
very conducive to having good technique. So I like to put that volume more in the accessories. But my higher, quote unquote, higher rep ranges for the comp lifts will be like pushing like towards the 5 rep range.
mm,
And then as we get closer to meet, that number will come down, obviously, because we're trying to start to mitigate fatigue in order to be able to display maximal strength. And then I can also control the amount of fatigue and volume they get and the accessories that they're doing. So I can start cutting back on the accessories. I can start cutting sets, reps, or like having them add weight but cut volume, stuff like that. So it's going to be a little bit dependent on the athlete. If you're first meet ever, it's going to be a very linear approach. I'm going to, kind of work you from the top down. As
mm,
volume decreases, intensity is going to increase with the intention of keeping fitness high while fatigue drops. The tricky part is when you get into the last 4 to 6 weeks of the meet prep, and if I have you need to figure out how this athlete peaks because essentially what you want is your fitness stays high so you don't get tired on meet day because that's not what we want. You don't want to be gassed by the time you hit your last
yeah.
deadlift. That's when you can put the most kilos onto your total. But you also don't want to be so fatigued that you can't even touch close to a PR. So it gets a little tricky there. Most people will peak just fine off a very like kind of just linear taper, where you're just dropping volume and increasing intensity. So it kind of looks like an X if you look at it
Yeah.
on a graph. Um, for me, I'm always just like, I need to know how much this peak and taper, like puts kilos on for this person because I don't know. Like, if they're a newbie, it's going to be bigger, but it might not be for some people. Like bench can peak and taper differently from squat. Deadlift can peak and taper differently from bench. Like each lift can kind of do their own thing. So it's really important to be tracking what you're doing and then looking at the outcome and seeing what you could do better. Um,
Do you kind of use your accessory lifts as sort of like quote unquote conditioning?
A little bit in the sense that like I have my athletes doing quite a bit of accessory work compared to what people will think as a more traditional powerlifting programs, like where you're only doing squat, bench, deadlift. I don't think you should only do squat, bench, deadlift unless you're Elia Bavoli. She only does squat, bench. She's like a top level French lifter, and she weighs like 165 pounds, squats like 405 for 8. She's an outlier. But I do believe that you need to be doing accessory lifts just to keep you healthy, and also because a lot of people just can't stay healthy when they do squat, bench,
Mm,
deadlift at that capacity. Like your low back's going to start to hurt, your shoulders will start to hurt, your knees will start to hurt. So it's important to have things outside of that. And I typically have these accessory movements, especially when we're far away from a meet, to be fairly high volume, like AMRAPs, drop sets,
mm,
stuff like that, because you're not only going to get that, it might be a little bit too much for like muscle hypertrophy. We're talking about minimum effective dosage, but you're going to get good conditioning benefits from it as well. And if you're recovering well, right, like prioritizing your sleep, prioritizing your nutrition, you still should be getting those hypertrophic benefits. And of course, if, we're powerlifting, we're not strength and conditioning athletes, right? This is different. Most people powerlifting are going to be recovering just fine because they don't have anything else outside the gym. They're
mm.
normal people at their job. So it's a little bit different from strength and conditioning
The gym
for
is
athletes.
essentially their sport. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a little bit different frame of reference in terms of like how you structure programming, how you look at training, because like it's like if I was to work with an athlete in a strength and conditioning setting, I would not do what I'm doing for powerlifters at all. Like that is the worst thing you could do probably for an athlete. Um, but for a powerlifter, that is their sport. So exactly what you said, they need to be doing a little bit more in the gym to help with that.
Yeah, you've kind of touched on it, the nutrition side of training and how it differs. What kind of recommendations do you give your clients?
Well, again, it depends on kind of where their starting point is. You'll you'll find I say it depends a lot because it
No, but
does.
it does, it really does, and I think that's what people don't understand about this sort of
It's very
industry that
nuanced.
we're in. It's very nuanced, and me and
Yeah.
Nate kind of touched on quite a lot of it, which is like you cannot treat everyone the exact same. Like that does
Yeah,
not
and
work.
that's why I think it's so important to have such a strong background in science because if you really know your biology, your biomechanics, your physiology, you will know where the it depends go to. Like you can take the principles of science and you apply that to all the it depends. So that's why I just really believe that everyone should have that solid background. But in terms of nutrition, again, it depends on where they start at. If I have a tech worker who doesn't eat any meals and they just eat ice cream at night and keep gaining weight, that's going to be different from someone who is eating a solid 3 meals, but maybe isn't quite seeing the recovery results that they want. So it's really going to just depend on where they're starting from. If I'm taking someone who has no foundational eating habits to begin with, like they don't eat breakfast, they don't eat lunch, their first meal isn't until 8 p.m., right? That's going to be a very different approach that I take from someone who already has some foundational nutrition
Mhm.
habits. So for the most part, I always check, are you eating meals? Are you having cravings? And do you have hunger signals? Those are like my big three to check first.
Can you explain what they are?
Yeah, so we know what meals are, like you're eating regular breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Cravings. Cravings really just tell me, like, oh, we're probably not getting what we need in our meals. Like, we shouldn't really be getting crazy cravings all the time. Of course, sometimes that's fine, but like if someone's like, oh, it's craving crunchy, salty after 6 p.m., that tells me we're probably not eating enough carbs like in the beginning of our day. Our body needs fuel. We need carbs. We can't cut carbs like that. We can't just be neglecting that. So if someone's having cravings, I like, oh, I'm like, okay, let's do a food journal. Let's just see what's going on. Let's point out where we're lacking. And then hunger signals are really big for me too. Like, are you even feeling hungry? Do you even feel full? If someone doesn't have, I've had clients who are like, I never feel hungry. And they're like, all proud of themselves. I never feel hungry. I'm like, well, that's not good. Your body has hunger cues and satiety cues for a reason. You need to be having those hunger signals. And it circles back to get those hunger signals, you need to be eating meals at structured times because
Mm.
that's going to help your body get those hunger signals back. So I really encourage people at least have something for breakfast. Like I used to never ever want breakfast early in the morning and I get up at like 3:45. So like when you're trying to eat breakfast at 4 a.m. and your stomach says no, you're just like I don't want to. But I knew how important it was for me because I'm about to go work with 6 clients in a row. I don't know when the next chance I am going to eat, and I'm going to work out right after. So if I'm not fueled for my workout, it's not going to be good. So if I can at least have a protein, carb heavy breakfast, then that's going to help me a lot throughout the day. I'm not
Mm.
going to feel like crap going into my workout. So I was not a breakfast person, but I would always make sure I ate one thing, and this is like 8 years ago when I started doing this. So I would have applesauce, and then eventually I was able to eat toast, and eventually became toast with an egg. And now I can wake up at 4 in the morning and actually have a hungry stomach. But this is like 8 years in the making. Like this stuff
Mm.
takes time. So just because you don't feel something kicking in the first month, just keep doing it because it's going to be beneficial in the long run, and you're just don't want to experience what's going to feel like to be not fueled going through the rest of your day. So that's kind of like the basics that I take first with people in nutrition. I just make sure they have those down. And then from there, we can kind of, make those fun little tweaks like, oh, you should be getting this many grams of protein. We can like look at your macros and look at all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. So in terms of the way that you program and sort of train, how does that? How do you implement? Do you have a coach or do you coach yourself?
I have a coach. So I recently just started working with Alyssa Parton of the Strength Guys. And they're
Mm.
a pretty prestigious powerlifting team. They have multiple coaches. Jason Tremblay is their founder. They have top athletes in the UK. They have top athletes in France, the US. So I recently started working with her. Not recently, like a year ago, like a year from August. So a little over a year now. But I was self coaching myself for the longest time. for powerlifting, which was, I think, was a great experience. I really enjoyed learning how to program for myself and learning how to structure powerlifting programs, experimenting with what I liked and what I didn't like. But if you are trying to, get better, I would at what you're doing, I really, really recommend you hire a coach because it makes a world of difference to not have that mental load and be second guessing yourself and just have someone objectively look at you and be like, this is what you need to get better and this is the quickest way we can do it. And it's just made such a difference to have her on my side as far as that.
100%. And I always, so I was in like a little, it was like an introduction to nutrition course, and the
Hmm.
guy that was leading it, he does a lot of Ironmans, and he's a freak athlete as well. Um, but the biggest point that he made during that sort of event was coaches need coaches,
Hmm.
and it's sort of like it's not being ashamed to be like, actually, I'm kind of out of my depth here, or I have too much going on. I can't focus solely on my program. So I need to get someone to do that for me. And there's no
Hmm.
shame in it. It's actually a really good
Mm-mm.
thing because you can also bounce ideas off each other as
Yeah,
well.
I've learned so much just getting Alyssa's coaching and programming. I've learned so much. And I don't even like chat with her all the time necessarily, but just because I know programming already, when I look at her programs,
Mm,
I know kind of what she's going for and like what these are for, what those are for, and why our rep schemes are like this because I know enough. So it's also just really awesome to look at different programs. Like I will just go buy training programs just to look at them and see like, oh, that's how they structure this. This is what exercise they use for this and just kind of keep stuff fresh for you and kind of gives you more tools in your toolbox. I also just love going to in-person coaching clinics, even though I know how to like ollie lift, I know how to clean and jerk, I know how to snatch, I know how to squat, bench, and deadlift, but it's just great to hear different cues, to get different perspectives. Because someone's going to be able to teach something better than you, or something's going to
mm,
click better with you than another cue. And it just, again, more tools in your toolbox. When I have a client who's my cue isn't working and I can pull this cue out that I learned at a clinic and that clicks, and that's just like it's great because I went and learned it and can use it and apply it.
100%. I actually have reached out to certain coaches and just asked, like, have you got a program that you've done that sort of sums up your way of programming? And they're usually, not always, but they're usually just send you it just so you can have a look at. Some coaches as well have like little packs of information on how they run their programs as well, and I've been fortunate enough to get them. And
Hmm.
it's also that thing of just reach out and you never know what can happen.
Yeah, and then I think coaches in the industry are just they just like to talk about this stuff. So they'll just chat with you about it and you can just, kind of have a discussion and just learn from each other. So that's also why going back to owning your own business, it's just so, so important to know how to network
Hmm.
in person and online because I feel like a lot of people who work for someone else kind of don't get that opportunity to learn how to network. I, as a business owner, had to go network with what felt like all of Seattle in order to start to grow my business. So I got really good at, you know, talking to people, getting to know people, like having productive conversations right off the bat. So that's just why I think it's just so important to network and reach out and just know who's in your area and just learn as much as you can from everyone around you because you never know who's going to have something that's just like a golden nugget for you to take from.
100%. What kind of considerations do you do for your own nutrition and like your
For my
competition
own
training?
for my own
Yeah.
nutrition, for the most part, and kind of what I do is what I recommend to everyone else too, if they have everything in check, like the meals, the hunger signals, and the cravings and all that. Make sure you eat enough protein because that's going to be the biggest contributor to recovery. So I personally aim for, the typical 1 gram per pound of body weight. So that's if I eat 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal and plus some high protein snacks, that usually does it for me. I'm not that big, so it's not too hard. Um, and then in terms of like carbs and fats, so powerlifting, super glycogen or yeah, glucose heavy sport. I'm going to want to be eating more carbohydrates. So, I just try to get carbs and I don't necessarily track. But, in the
Mm,
past I have tracked. So I kind of can now eyeball and see like, oh, this is about XYZ grams of carbs. And I make sure I get, at least that much per meal. So I know I'm getting like roughly like at least this amount of carbs per day. And I can feel it too. Like if you've been training for long enough and doing it for long enough, you'll be able to tell like, oh, I'm low on carbs either from the day before or today. My lifts aren't moving as snappy. My muscles don't feel as full. So the more you experienced you are, the more you can kind of correlate those as well and kind of adjust as needed, right? Um, Nutrition, like at competition, is going to look a little bit different. You don't really want the protein sitting in your stomach or the fat
Mm.
sitting in your stomach when you're trying to be lifting as heavy as possible for one rep, because again, very glucose dependent energy systems you're working with. Um, and there's also the factor of weigh-ins and making weight and possibly being dehydrated. USAPL has a 2-hour weigh-in, so you weigh in 2 hours before you lift. So that's not a lot of time to like refuel and rehydrate. So if you're doing a big weight cut, that could be really detrimental to you. So there's going to be different considerations for that too. Getting your electrolytes in, getting your carbohydrates in, getting your liquids in before you lift, and then making sure you're figuring out where is the best time to have your meal. You don't want a sandwich before you deadlift. You might throw up all over the head judge when all that, intra-abdominal pressure comes in, right? So it's just going to be a little different animal on meet day in terms of like nutrition considerations. But for the most part, like day-to-day stuff is going to be very simple.
Yeah. What kind of considerations do you do then for when you're sort of during your different fluctuations during the month as a woman?
Yeah, so again depends on woman to woman. I personally don't really fluctuate that much in my body weight, but some people really do, like 5 to 10 pounds. So you just have to take that into consideration, especially if you're competing and have a weight class to make. Like if your meet falls on the week of your period, you're kind of screwed. You might be 10 pounds heavier. So really having everything locked in as much as you can beforehand is going to be really helpful, because then you're just going to be able to, if you have your nutrition consistent, your training consistent, your sleep consistent, then you just have less variables to deal with when it comes to weight fluctuations and water weight and retention, all that kind of stuff. So you'll kind of be able to figure out the trends. Again, it's going to be individual for each
Mm-hmm.
person, so I can't really make like a generalized like standard recommendation, but I will say the one thing for anyone to do, male or female, is just make sure that you're eating the amount of calories that you need to be eating. Like a lot of people will be shocked at how many people are actually under eating,
Mm-hmm.
and not getting enough carbs and protein. um, I tell my athletes for off season, our goal, or anyone who's like not in a fat loss phase, our goal is to get you to eat the most amount of calories you can in maintenance, because our maintenance calories is a range, just like a lot of things in our body is. So if we can just jack up your maintenance calories as high as you can, you're just going to be giving your body the best opportunity to train from, the best opportunity to be recovering from. And when you do have to cut calories for a meet, for fat loss, whatever the reason is, you have a lot more wiggle room to cut from versus like being at the bare minimum and having to cut from bare minimum, right? So, male or female, athlete or not, I always recommend that to be your biggest priority, eating enough and spending a lot of time eating enough and being in that really fueled state.
Yeah. So, what kind of differences do you see during your sort of cycle and your period, where it's obviously you're a strength based like athlete, and during your menstrual cycle or during your time, you kind of see those levels dip?
I personally don't see any difference. And again, it's just gonna differ from
Yeah,
woman to woman.
everyone's different. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of recently on social media these like cycle syncing
yeah. Mm,
trends where it's like, oh, bleh, sync your cycle to your workouts and your nutrition, but there's just not enough good research-based evidence to support any of that. So and the differences you see in like strength levels, it just varies so much from individual to individual. So it's really just becomes like what feels good for you. If you always feel sluggish and crappy on your period, like, then sure, let's look at possibly changing your training to help accommodate for that. Or maybe we need to look at what you're doing, like nutrition wise and sleep wise. Like, why are we feeling this way in the first place? And can we make improvements to help you with that by actually, like, maybe we need to feel better, we need to recover better, we need to like set up ourselves better for that. Um, but and then, but if you're like, I don't feel any changes
Mm.
in strength, then cool, let's not change anything. Why fix what's broke, right? So it's
How
really just
big
going
of
to depend on the individual.
how big of an impact do you think nutrition is to that?
I will say for females specifically, you will typically see girls undereat more than anything else just because of society and like what we've been told from a young age. So I have found that if we can get you to a place where you're eating enough and feeling yourself well and therefore promoting enough recovery, a lot of those performance deficits that we might feel or experience throughout the menstrual cycle, and again, this is very like individual, anecdotal, this is not very general at all, those tend to start to feel a little better and less of like a and more of like
Mm.
a so less more steadied out. Again, it's eliminating variables and just, treating your body like a like like how you should, like just making sure you're getting enough fuel. But again, like it's
Protein
all
core.
very nuanced and it can be very difficult to have these conversations with some females because, everyone's experience has been different around food and exercise. So you got to be very aware of that and making sure using language that is not kind of playing into, I don't want to say it, but like diet culture, right?
Mm.
Um, avoiding terms that can be like, very like diety. I can't think of anything right off the bat, but like, just making sure that you're approaching it with a very neutral outlook. And always, always, always prioritizing that you are like, I am telling you this because I care for you and want you besides get results, just want you to be a healthy human being with a good relationship with food and exercise because that is really important to me, and that is important that I convey that to you, that I make sure that you feel that I'm prioritizing that for you just as a human being, client, and friend, right? So it can be very complicated, very nuanced when you're trying to approach those conversations, but it's important just to keep that at the top priority, no
Yeah.
matter like who you're working with, obviously, and what they're experiencing.
I actually I've grown to hate the word diet
Yeah.
because if you eat cheeseburgers all day long every single day of the week, that is still a diet. That is your
Hmm.
diet. But
Yeah.
people have sort of came up with this definition for this word where it's like you have to eat less.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah, and
like
I definitely, I try to be super aware and like we're not going to say stuff like I don't ever say like cutting calories or
mm,
like these diety terms or like look I try to avoid these like kind of buzzwords because like those can be kind of triggering back into for some people, and you don't know what these people experiences are, so I try to be very neutral with the language that I use and I make a conscious effort to do it. I try my best to avoid them. But again, like at the same time, like I also tell my clients, especially my female clients who have anxiety around, like, for example, anxiety around stepping on the scale. I'm
mm,
like, we need to take that power back and like you won't I'm trying to figure out a good way to say this. Like, once you can step on that scale and not feel any sort of emotion, or you can say the
mm,
word diet and not spiral back in, that's when you know that you have made good mindset changes and feel like free or liberated of that kind of societal mindset, because that's what I would consider like true neutrality. Like, we can be like, oh, like I'm 10 pounds heavier than last month, like how am I going to respond to that? That's going to be very key to
mm.
like those conversations that you have around that. So
How do you
um
initially start this progress into them having this shift?
I don't necessarily go in with any sort of like, oh, I'm going to fix you, because
Mm,
that's going to
yeah.
come off in how you talk, right? So it's really about like, and a lot of people say this, like coaching is a relationship. It's about cultivating that relationship with your clients, and learning about them and what their background is and just listening to them and what their concerns are and what their fears are and what caused them to have anxiety about XYZ. And then, just not showing any sort of like, when my clients leave food journals or like, and they put like ice cream on it, like I'm not gonna be like, why are you eating ice cream? It's after
Mm.
9 p.m. I'm gonna be like, ooh, that ice cream looks good. Where'd you get it from? Like I'm that coach. Like I'll go out to ice cream with you. I'll go I'll go to restaurants with you and we're gonna share dessert because like why not? We're living life, we're gonna eat good food. I'm not ever going to be like, you can't eat cheeseburger. I'm gonna be the one buying you cheeseburger. So like that's the kind of like approach that I have. Um, and then just, those exposures to that kind of mindset and outlook on food, you don't know like how powerful that can be.
Mm.
Because maybe these women, their friends are always talking about, oh, I need to starve myself. I need to go on a juice cleanse. I can't be eating that. Like that might be all that they hear from their circle.
Surroundings,
That
yeah.
might be what they hear from their significant others. Like men have this issue too. Like it's not just a female only issue. Like you'll hear men say, "Oh, that was so unhealthy. I shouldn't have done that." Or like stuff like that. It's like just erasing that sort of like morality around food or exercise and just coming in and showing them like, "Hey, I'm in this industry and I don't say stuff like that."
Mm.
Itself can just be really impactful and then help them have that mindset switch instead of having like a structured conversation like we
Mm.
don't use this word, just showing them through your actions and like how you respond to them and the language you use that can make a difference because like one of my clients, she came from like a background where she was in performing arts and like
Mm.
dancers and stuff like that. Most of them have these issues because they need to be fitting into their costumes, and she's like, it's great because if I tell Laura that I ate a slice of cake last night, she's like, ooh, where was it from? Can I have some too? I'm not going to be like, why were you eating cake, right? So it's just like a different outlook on food that I'm exposing people to
Yeah,
and
and
trying to
Seattle's got
help
some good
them
ass food too.
see. Bring
I
me
miss
some, all your Halloween candy.
I honestly, there's one place I miss the most, and it's Molly Moon's ice cream.
Oh yeah, Molly Moon's is pretty good. I live.
Yeah,
Have you heard of the Flower Box?
Starbucks.
It's in
Uh,
Seattle. It's a donut shop. Especially, I've been going with my clients to get donuts, and you will wait like 2 hours for these donuts and they sell out in like an hour. But we'll go
really?
and we'll all get donuts and we'll sit there eating our donuts and like tasting the special flavors that they make. Like once they had this like matcha cream donut, they've had like this creme brulee. Yep, that's it. It's so good. I'll just go with my clients and we'll all go get donuts. So again, that's the kind of trainer I am. I'm gonna go get donuts with you.
No, I think that's what makes you so good though, is because you're able to have these, like, I hate to use this word, but it's the only word that there is for it. It's human connection with
Hmm.
your clients. And like I think I'm pretty sure I've spoken about this book in every single episode up until this point. But conscious coaching like teaches you that. It teaches you
Hmm.
that everyone's individual, everyone's lived life differently. And two, you kind of need to have these open sort of lines of communication between your athletes and not be a robot about it.
Yeah, and then once you leave, it's not like any other job. When you leave work, you don't see that person or you don't talk to that person. Again, it's a relationship. So they could text you, they could want to talk. And of course, you need to set your boundaries, like, as an individual, like with any relationship. But, you know, when you're cultivating these relationships, and exercise and nutrition are such intimate topics for a lot of
Mm,
people, intimate things that people do. Food is a very intimate thing. People gather to eat food, and connections and traditions are established around food. So, it's a very interpersonal job. And, I am naturally an introvert, very shy as a kid. So it took me practice to
mm,
be able to form genuine solid connections like this and being open and and loving to be able to do that, because that's definitely was not my like natural inclination, especially like when I started in the industry. Like it was something that I learned to love and learn how to cultivate.
yeah. I think that is what is key, is just like this bond that you can create with them. I think that's
Yeah, for
awesome.
sure.
I love that. So we are trying a new segment as well. This is a nice transition into it. So I put on my story on Instagram just some questions that people wanted to sort of know a little bit about yourself and sort of how you go about this industry. So, question one was challenges that you faced as a female strength and conditioning coach, and how did you resolve them?
I think of a. Can do you have to think of a specific scenario?
You had one in your story today, and I was
I
like,
did.
God
Yeah.
damn
Okay,
it.
I'll tell that one. So I was talking with insurance salesman, and then I'm just there like give me my insurance. I'm a real adult now. Um, and then he like wraps up the conversation by being like, uh, what is the one exercise a male in his 20s and 30s should be doing? And I'm like, okay, whatever. I answer. I say, I say my answer and give the rationale. And he's like, oh, you passed. You're a good coach. And then like blah blah blah. He's like, I used to play baseball at this Division three college, like blah 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 blah. And then I hang up, and then I'm like, that was kind of rude. Like, what gave him like the idea that he was going to be able to validate like my abilities as a coach? And then I was like, would he have said that to me if I was a man? Was this like because like I'm a female strength coach? I was like, that was kind of weird. But that was like one. That was one story. I've
Mm,
definitely had parents of athletes, specifically dads, like try to really come up and challenge me on stuff. Male athlete or not male athletes, but male clients in general who have tried to like um challenge me on certain things too, or like not maybe not necessarily out of like ill intent, but just like the fact that society allows men to speak in that way. And then one thing that was interesting to navigate was when you enter a male dominant society, how do you play into that testosterone filled weight room, but still keep your strengths and elements of femininity into your job? Like that was something that was hard. Like you, like inclination is, oh, be one of the boys, like, but then you realize, like, as you get older and get more mature in your job, like, that's not the only way to do it to earn respect of male colleagues and um, of male athletes, right? So, I think most female coaches who work predominantly in like a male dominated environment have experienced that kind of like trying to figure out like where the line is between like
mm,
being quote unquote one of the boys, but at the same time, playing into your strengths as a female coach, like being able to connect with female athletes, being able to talk about certain things with female athletes that they aren't comfortable talking to the male coaches to. So stuff like that.
yeah. What kind of things do you do or say to sort of nip that in the bud when a male sort of a parent or an athlete sort of comes up to you and challenges you?
Um, just display my knowledge. Like that's kind of all. Like I don't want to be like rude or like
Mm,
aggressive necessarily with them, right? And like in the moment, it can be just hard to like realize what's happening, especially like at first when that first starts happening to you. So just and I'm very confident in my background in science and my knowledge as a coach and my experience as a coach. So I will explain what my like knowledge is and like display it, and I feel like I can do that very well and competently, so that usually does the trick. They can argue with me.
mm,
I will have something to say though. There's for most arguments that people throw at me, I usually have a good response just because
yeah,
like I am very confident in my background in science and in coaching and in what I do as a professional in this industry.
nice. Um, question two is what is one thing you would have done differently?
Like in the beginning of my career, like just
Mm,
in general, like in
beginning,
business, and
yeah. Actually, I'll take both.
there's a lot of things I would have done differently. I let's see. I don't reg- so I my very first job actually, this is something I my very first job in the fitness industry was as like a boot camp instructor, and I really don't regret that because that helped me like I was coaching 50 people at once and having to find my coaching voice and all that stuff. So I don't regret any of that. I maybe would have, in terms of like business, I do wish that I had really leaned into becoming better on social media earlier, getting
Mm.
comfortable talking in front of the camera and stuff like that. Um, and then I would have gotten a coach way sooner in terms of like my own athletic career. I would have got a powerlifting coach like way sooner. I could have like, I might not have like learned what I like and don't like and learned as much about programming as I did by not programming for myself, but I think I would just not have wasted as much time like not getting
Mm.
stronger. Because once you pass that newbie stage where you can like just free fall
Get
gains,
hard.
yeah, it gets hard, and you like throw everything, like you throw spaghetti on the wall, and you're like, what works? And you try it, and you're like, that worked, but then you do it again, like, oh, it didn't work. So I
Yeah,
definitely would have like hired a coach like way, way earlier, because that's just been so valuable, and I just would have, I could. If I think about like how much progress I've made in this year, I'm like, huh, where
mm,
could I have been if I'd started out with a coach? And I do think I would have learned more too, because you learn from other people's coaching.
100%. I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is like after a certain stage, like the progress margins get smaller and smaller. So
Mm-hmm.
like even like professional athletes, that 1% better can
Yeah.
take like a year. For like
Yeah.
Olympic athletes, they're training 4 years for that little bit better. And
Yeah,
some
and sorry, go ahead.
no, it's all
Oh,
you
and
go.
I was just gonna say, like some people like to do like again, like I said, program for themselves because you learn. But
Mm,
I would argue that you can learn more and better by working with a coach because there is textbook knowledge and then there is real world knowledge, and we know that they are very similar but also different, right? Like the way you learn how to program in a book and the NSCA essentials is going to be a little bit different from how you might program in real life. So I do think that you can learn a lot by reading, obviously, but I do think you can actually learn more by
definitely.
working with a coach. Yeah.
Yeah. Third question is kind of a follow up from sort of some of the things that we spoke during the podcast. But what is your breakdown approach to periodization for strength, and how do you apply it to yourself? I know you've got a coach, but how is that applied to you, and how do you apply it to your clients?
What is my periodization for strength? Well, we kind of touched on it a little bit. Like I like that kind of daily undulating or undulating approach, a little bit conjugate approach. Um, Reasons being like, but again, like I will use linear if I have a new client or a beginner client. So it just kind of depends on like what this person needs. Reason why I like the undulating approach is because when you are training at a good amount of times a week, like 3, 4 times, 5 times a week, you can't it's you can't really be working on like the same things throughout the week. Like you're gonna plateau really quickly. It's
Mm,
gonna be easier to get injured, and I just personally just don't prefer like higher rep ranges too when I am um, training. Especially like power lifts, like comp lifts. So like a lot of the way I think of like powerlifting programming is very similar to like strength and conditioning. We want to be working speed, we want to be working power, and we want to be working strength. But how I look at for powerlifting, we want to be working strength, obviously. We want to be working rate of force development or speed, and then technique, right? So those are kind of the three things that I like to focus on. So like an example of like a week of some clients workout will have some sort of strength day. It could be a max effort day, depending on what um, time phase of training in there. And if they're far away from a meet and we're trying to build up strength in certain areas and certain ranges of motion, it could be a max effort day or it could be just a very like traditional strength day, intensity ranges 80, 90%, rep ranges of 1 to 5, right? And then I like to have, that's like my high intensity, like high day, max effort day. And then I'll have the next, if it's the next lower body day or next upper body day, it'll be a more low intensity because you don't want to be going from high intensity to high intensity. And that'll often be like the technique focus day that I put in. So I could regulate intensity and RPE or rate of perceived exertion by doing like a long pause squat, a low box squat, a pin squat. So something that I know this athlete's going to benefit from technique wise and perhaps strength wise, but obviously the intensity of the lift is way lower
Mm.
because we cannot pause squat as much as we can just regular squat. And then your you know, third day, like for example, let's say this person's squatting 3 days a week, that third squat day might be more of like a speed focus or like rate of force development focus. So maybe they're doing like a dynamic effort day, they're using bands and chains, maybe they're doing just like an intensity that they can move at a certain meter per second or velocity. But again, this kind of also just depends. Like I will not probably will not run this for the whole year. It's going to change depending on what phase of training they're in. But that is typically kind of what I fall back on.
Yeah. Um. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
Um.
of course. Thanks so much for having me on.
No, it's all good. When I saw your page, I was like, I need to speak. Um. I think it was just the way that you were sort of handling yourself as well. I think it's a really important thing to obviously something like you've said before is have that confidence online and just sort of make connections as well. That's why I love this podcast. Is like I just get to speak to coaches,
Yeah, and
and
it's
that
really
for me,
cool what
I'm
you're
just
doing.
happy.
Yeah, I hope you grow a lot, and because it's great to hear from other people and hear all their experiences. So that's why we like listening to these podcasts.
Yeah, and I'm genuinely having fun making them as well.
That's
Um,
great. Yeah.
could you just let everyone know where they could reach you, or sort of any plugs that you kind of want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, so I am based in Seattle. I train out of Aspire Athletics. So that is where I primarily do my training out of. You can find me on my Instagram at Little Laura Lifts. That's Laura without an A and then straight into lift. So LITTLELAURALIFTS. Super long handle, but that is my Instagram. You can DM me on there. I'm really active on my Instagram. Yep, that's me. I have all my pin poster. There's all the info, link in bio, all the info you need about working with me is pretty much right there. You can also go to my website, www.liberatestrength.com. Brand new website that I just got professionally done, which is super exciting. I don't know if you can get on my website from the link in bio, but
No,
if you go to liberatestrength.com, that is my website. You can also get in touch with me there. Email me, Laura at liberatestrength.com. DM me. I'm pretty easy to reach for the most part. I always start off clients with a info call, and then we have an intro session to assess. And I take in-person one-on-one clients as well as online coaching clients. So yeah,
perfect. Thank you so much.
yeah, of course. It's so great chatting with you. Thanks for having me on.
All good.